It's time to stitch out the 2 scoops of ice cream, our first block on our 2 scoop sponge pillow.
Ice cream in a cone. Ice cream.
Never Settle is on page 13. I have the background fabric and the other fabric all backed with fusible interfacing, and I have the batting. Now for this first block, I am going to do just as the directions call for. So while normally I cut my batting to size, which this piece is cut to size, I am just going to set that aside. I am going to use a larger piece of batting like the directions call for. And I am also not going to be using embroidery software to merge my files. And so I will do everything right at the machine. This block also has a few items from the embellishment packet. This is the Flexi Foam. I have taken an old piece that I saved from another project. You can see I've used it. And I will be using that for these 2 scoops of ice cream. And I just do that so that I can use smaller pieces up, and I will save my larger pieces. There's quite a few items or blocks that use this, and so I will just save what comes in my kit. And then I also need this silver embroidery leather that I will use as well. So I have everything ready to go. So let's start our first block. Before I get started on my first block, I want to mention a couple of things. When I start a new big project, I always change my needle. And so I have a new needle in. And when I put my fabric down, most of the time I use a spray adhesive. My favorite is this Ganold KK100. And so I don't always do that right on video, but I usually spray this on the back just very lightly. Another thing that I always do is when I put my designs onto a USB, I then plug it into this little pigtail cord. This cord is always in my machine, and I don't take this cord in and out of the port on my machine. It just saves wear and tear. And so I just take my USB if I'm going to, put a new design on it or get a new USB with different designs. I always do it into this cord. That just, again, saves wear and tear, and it's cheaper to replace this cord. I think I got 2 for about $10 on Amazon versus taking a USB in and out of my machine. So that's how I use my USB. And even though my machine has capabilities to do Wi-Fi, I usually put all of my files on a USB. So that's always just to the side of my machine. Now for this first block, I have just one piece of muslin. Now normally, if you've seen any of my videos, I keep the whole strip attached, and I talked about that in the prep video. This piece just happens to be the very last of the strip that I had, and it fits. So that's why I just have the one piece. Again, normally I have the strip just still attached to the hoop. All right, so I'm going to get started. I am using my 7x12. I use this hoop probably the most out of any of my hoops. This was just a hoop I got in a set off Amazon. This is not a Brother hoop. So, but I use it all the time. All right, so let's get started on this first block. So I will go to embroidery and to my USB. And I'm going to talk about how I organize my files, probably starting the next block, because I will be using software some of the times to merge some of my designs. And so on my USB, I have the quilting bundle, which is all the background quilting designs. I have the embroidery files, and those are the files for the actual design of the block. And these two are purchases from Kimberbell. Now, the embroidery file is what comes when you purchase the project. The quilting bundle is an additional purchase. You don't have to use their background quilting. You can use any background quilting that fits the block that you're doing. The quilting that Kimberbell puts out is so great because their background quilting designs really kind of mimic the embroidery files that are used throughout the quilt. And so when there is a quilting bundle, I will usually purchase that. Then this third folder I called Combined Files. This is a folder that I made myself. And again, I'll show that when I get to using software. And when I either merge files or make any sort of changes, combine anything like that, I will put it into the Combined Files folder. But again, we'll go into that in more detail later. So the first thing I need to do is bring in the background quilting. So I will choose the quilting bundle. This takes food 5, and this will be block by block. And I need the 6 by 6 design. And then I will hit set. And then I will go to add. I will go back to my USB, and this time to the embroidery file. And I will look for my block of the 2 ice cream scoops. And I will hit set. Now the last hoop I used, I think, was my 5 by 7. Of course, that will not fit, and I am using my 7 by 12. So I'm going to go to settings, and I am going to change this. And on my machine, I need to choose the 8 by 12. Now I don't have a 7 by 12 in my machine. I'm using the Stellaire one. I haven't upgraded, so I have to choose the 8 by 12, even though I'm using a 7 by 12 hoop. But I'll show you what I am going to do. So I've changed that, and I will select OK. Now you can see that there's lots of room above and below, and a little bit of room to the side. Now, normally when I have my muslin still attached to the strip, I will move this so that I can save on stabilizer. This time it doesn't matter because I won't be able to save any of this for anything. I might be able to move it down and maybe use it for my 4x4, but I'm not going to worry about that. So I am going to select embroidery, but there's one thing that I need to do when I have my 7 by 12 hoop on, and that is move it as far to the left as I can. It's not going to be a whole lot, but I need to compensate for the fact that my machine thinks I have an 8-inch wide hoop, but I only have a 7-inch wide hoop. So I'm going to go to layout and move, and then I'm just going to move this all the way to the left. Again, it's not very much, but you can see that now I have more room on this right side so that there's not a chance that my embroidery foot will hit the side of my hoop. Now I do notice as I'm looking at this background quilting, I think I'm going to go do some changes. So I am going to select OK, and this is ready to stitch out, but I'm going to make one change with the background quilting. If I look at the background quilting, there's these cute like milkshakes, and this mimics again one of the blocks that we'll do in just a little bit. It has the milkshake and some ice cream cones, and I am going to rotate this background quilting to see if I can see that a little bit better. Totally not necessary, but I'm going to select return because right now this is one design, and so I can't make changes just to the background quilting, which is what I want to do. So I am going to hit return, and now these are separate designs. I mean, I can move them or change or do something separately. So I am going to select with this arrow because the never settle is what I brought in last, and I don't want to change the actual design. I want to change the background quilting. So I selected and it went back to the first one. I am going to go to edit and rotate. And so now you can see that the background quilting is selected. And so I'm going to rotate it, I think, 2 at 90 degrees, which is 180 degrees. So now, if you can see, this little milkshake is up where I can see it a little bit better. I like that. I can see this little ice cream cone. Anyways, again, totally not necessary, but I thought that that little milkshake glass was so cute, and that's in the upper left corner, and I think I'll be able to see it better. So now that I have it where I want it set, I'll select OK and go back to embroidery. And going back to embroidery, we'll combine this into one file. So now it moves together. Another thing I also like to do is go to the minus plus needle, and that just gives me the option to move forward a step or back a step, or stitches. If, for example, I run out of thread or my thread breaks or something and I need to move back stitches or steps. So I like to just be on that screen. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is stitch out the placement for the batting. So now it's time to place the batting, and again, I'm going to do what the directions call for, and that's for a larger piece of batting. So I just need to make sure that my batting completely covers this placement line. And now I will tack it down. Now after I tacked the batting down, I trimmed it, and then I ran the placement for the fabric. And these are going to be steps that for the most part I will skip from here on out. One is because I cut my batting normally to the exact size, and so running the tack down wouldn't do anything. I also don't typically run the placement for the fabric because you can see it's just 1/4 of an inch past the batting, and our fabric is cut so much larger, and that's from the Kimberbell instructions. And so this, to me, this isn't really needed. However, you can run all of the steps all of the time, and that's totally fine. So now with my background fabric, I just need to make sure that I place it over and have about the same amount, as long as it covers that placement line or covers the batting essentially, because it's so big, then we'll be good. So now I will do the tack down of the fabric. Now it's time to start the fun background quilting. So after the background quilting, it's going to stitch the placement line for the metal scoops, but I wanted to just show you something with this background quilting. And this is why I just adore the background quilting from Kimberbell. So here is this cute little milkshake, and that exactly matches our little milkshake block that we're going to do in a few videos coming up. That's just my favorite. But also there's, you know, this soft serve ice cream that we have a block that looks just like that. We have the cherries that we have a block on, and that's just what's so great about Kimberbell is they just match their background quilting bundle to the project with the same as their designs. So let's go ahead and stitch out the placement for the scoops. So after the 2 placement lines for the scoops are stitched out, the leather the silver leather that comes in the embellishment kit is meant to really just take this whole thing and cover it up and stitch it down. I am going to try to save this. Again, I really like to save materials, and I might want to use this. I could probably get 4 of these if I wanted to just make my own block, or put it into a pillow or whatever, something totally different. So what I'm going to do, again, this is something that's totally optional. You can just tape this down, stitch it out, and cut. I'm going to do it a little bit different. And this is going to be raw edge applique, which means that it's going to tack it down, and then no other stitches, like no satin stitches or any kind of decorative stitches, will be around the scoop. And so we need to cut it and be done with the scoop. So I need to make sure that I'm a little bit above so that I can trim it nice. I don't want to trim it right next to the stitching, so I want to go a little bit above. So I will just make sure I'm out this way, and then I'm just going to scoot it just a little bit above. And then I am just going to tape down this side. So what I'm going to do is going to stitch this bottom one first. When this gets done stitching and it ends and cuts the thread, getting ready to move to the second one, I will go ahead and manually stop my machine. It will move to the next position, but then it won't stitch. Then I can come cut this off and save as much material as I can. Again, totally optional. So let's get this first one stitched down. So now I have this whole piece, and I could probably get at least 2, maybe even 3 more scoops, or again, use this for something else. So I'm going to put that back into my embellishment packet. So now, again, this is raw edge applique. So I'm going to take, when I do raw edge applique, I always use my little curved straight scissors. You don't really want to use the curved scissors where the blade is, because then it kind of leaves smile lines, and so we want this nice and smooth. So I am going to trim around this ice cream scoops. I do want to note that whenever possible, I like to do the raw edge applique when it's completely out of the hoop. I could do that for most of this, like the bottom edge and maybe the handle, but because there's going to be the ice cream on top of the scoop, I'm going to go ahead and do it while it's in the hoop. Again, if it's all possible and my raw edge applique is not going to be stitched over again, I usually don't cut it until everything is done and I have my block actually out of the hoop. But in this case, let's continue. Now the next step is going to be some detail on the ice cream scoops. The next step is going to be the placement for the flexi foam for the ice cream scoops. It will run the placement. I will place the flexi foam and tack it down, and then trim the foam. The next step after trimming the flexi foam is a placement for the fabric. And you can see how much bigger our fabric is than our ice cream cone or our ice cream. We really don't need that placement. I am going to go ahead and run it. And I put my pink thread in just to show you that this really isn't a step that's needed. However, you can again choose to do all of the steps. So if you look at the pink, it goes right next to where I trimmed. Now this would be good if, let's say, I wasn't trimming as quite as close as I did, which I'm not super close, but if I was questioning if I needed to trim more, then this would be a step that you could run. And if there was anything outside of the stitching, the flexi foam, you could trim that off. But you can just see how you really don't need that step. And again, look how big our fabric is. So I've sprayed the back, and I'm just going to center that fabric and then run the tack down of the fabric, trim the fabric, and then run the decorative outline. Now I'm going to repeat the steps for the vanilla ice cream. Place the fabric, tack it down, trim it, and then run the decorative outline. The last step is to stitch out the words. So I'm ready to trim my block to size, and I gave it a quick press, pressing mostly from the back side, and the front I just press kind of the edges. If you do want to press from the front over the whole block, of course you'll need to use a pressing cloth or a Teflon sheet or something to protect this leather. So I am going to use the orange pop rulers. I think if you're doing anything Kimberbell, these are such a time saver, and they are made, of course, specifically for their projects. Now, I am going to leave my basting in for right now. I will line up my ruler. This will be cut to 6 by 6, and I'm going to line the inside of my ruler up with those basting or the tack down of the fabric. And it may not be exactly on one edge. I can see it's a little bit pulled in right here, and that's why if you're not using the orange pop rulers, you don't automatically just use a regular ruler and cut along this stitching, because you can see a little bit has pulled in from the quilting. So you would always want to measure before you cut. With the orange pop rulers, I will just do my best to center with those stitches and then cut them.
Ice cream in a cone. Ice cream, never alone.
And then I have my block cut to size. Now, this is a quilting design that did not go into the seam allowance, and so I am going to go ahead and remove this stabilizer, which is my muslin, and trim it right next to the batting so that this stabilizer or this muslin is not in my seam allowance. And so you can see right here, I will just take this and trim it right next to the batting. Now I do have a couple of spots because I left my basting in that, you know, is still attached. So I will just remove that and then trim all that. So let's get that done.